Hello and welcome to the Turn 4 podcast. I am your host, Dan Maldonado. Welcome to a special episode where Tim and I get to talk about, well, essentially Tim's list of grievances with regard to the schedule that was announced for the 2023 IndyCar season. Tim, who's Tim? Tim is my co-host, Tim Reiner. Hey, Timmy.
Hello, Dan. How are you today?
I'm all right. I would ask you how you are, but I know you're aggrieved by
No, I'm
by the schedule.
okay. I've had a day to sort of simmer on this new schedule, and I'm glad you
Right.
took some time out of your day in order to talk a little bit about the schedule
For
because it,
sure.
it came out and it was, underwhelming. It wasn't very exciting from my perspective.
Status quo.
Yeah.
Hmm?
And so I looked at it a little bit and I was going through it, and it starts off the same way it started off in the past. You've got a race and then you've got a full 30 days, 1 month before the next race, which I think we were all anticipating that, but we'd all like to see changes to, how that season starts off. However, after that, it seems to really kick in and it seems to go. You've got 3 races in April, the 2 in May, and then a bunch in June, and so on and so forth, all the way to September 10th in the finale, which is at Laguna Seca, like it was this past year. So I don't see a lot of changes in the schedule at all. I don't think anybody did, and I think it was one of those scenarios where people were like, "Oh, here it is," and we're disappointed in what it is. However, I did want to point out a bright spot, Dan, and I tweeted about this a little bit too. I think Detroit is one of the bright spots this year with the new layout, and us being Detroiters, I think we're really excited. If you're listening to us on YouTube, Dan has his shirt on Detroit and has all the teams on the sleeve too. Show that off too for a minute.
Yeah, there you go. I
But
read
I
the
think
D.
the new very good. But I think the new layout here in Detroit is going to be um, it's going to be better than most people think. I think it came out, it sort of fell flat on the fans. Scott McLaughlin was just there for the Detroit Auto Show and did a round around the track, if you will, went around it, and he had positive things to say. Of course, he wouldn't say anything negative. His boss is the promoter on that and
Right.
all that good stuff.
His boss owns the show.
But but I think with that being the bright spot, and a lot of people, I'm going to say this. I think a lot of people don't see Detroit as a great place to go and hang out and do different things. But as we know, being Detroiters and being in the area and the way downtown has really changed, I know we had a little bit of hiccup here with COVID, but overall, it's a great place to visit. And I think people should consider that when they look at the schedule and what's new on the schedule. And that's the newest and the brightest thing that I see coming out just yesterday when the schedule sort of hit here.
Right. I'm not as optimistic about the track layout in Detroit as you are, but there is work that's going on relative to that track, which is really good, and there's a lot of community participation. We're obviously Detroiters, right, being based here in Detroit, so that's one of the things that probably stand out to us a little bit. I'm not as positive about it, like I said, but I'd love to see the first race. I have seen Formula One. I was very, very young. I have seen Formula One in the streets of Detroit. I don't remember seeing IndyCar or Champ Car in Detroit. To me, it's my greater memory, of course, is Belle Isle. So, we'll see what happens there. I always tell everybody all the time, I'm happy to be surprised. I'm happy to be proved wrong, and I hope in this case I'll be proved wrong with regard to Detroit. But let me back up to the schedule real quick. I I don't I don't particularly care for the month break between St. Pete and Texas, but I like the April pacing, to be frank with you. You go from the second Texas Motor Speedway, the 16th, and then 30th in Alabama. I like that pacing. And the fact is, you're limited in terms of where you can go because you at that time of year you need warm weather and you need the South.
Hmm.
So IndyCar tracks that are capable of hosting IndyCar and putting on a really, really good show, that's where everything starts to narrow, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're at with that. But I like that pacing. I know this isn't the premise of what we're trying to accomplish here, but the one big thing that I'd like to see, and I'm sure we'll get some information throughout the off season, is what are they going to do to promote Texas? And I
Yeah.
think you even mentioned
Absolutely.
it right on our episode just a couple of days ago, was that even NASCAR wasn't very well attended there.
No. And then I saw a
So,
bunch of gripes about the track and how the layout
right.
wasn't good after they reconfigured
Yeah.
it. and how 1 and 2 are different than 3 and 4, which sets the balance off on the cars.
Well,
So
boo hoo. That's I mean, that's racing, dude, right?
uh,
So you can't
I
build a
agree. And
track just to, oh, what's going to make a perfect layout or what's going to make a perfect setup for these cars? It's not how it works, right? That's competition.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's not a demonstration, it's competition. So
Yeah.
sorry, I
And
keep swinging back and forth for those that are watching
you're
on the
standing.
YouTube thing. Yeah, I'm on my standing desk. I've had a very busy day, and I tend to stand at this desk when I have days like today where I go from one meeting to another. So
You are swaying. I thought
yeah,
maybe something was going on with a
so
hurricane by you, but
I
that
apologize.
can't be
Yeah,
the case. Yeah, and I don't know if you look at the beginning of the schedule. I don't know if you move St. Pete back to later in March. I don't know why it has to be so early
it's
in
a
March. Maybe
municipality,
it's
right? Some
yeah,
of that
maybe it has
stuff's
to
out
do
of
with
your
spring
control.
break and things of
Hmm.
that sort of people coming in. I think that's probably the reason. But I think you need a filler inside of there. And I'd almost propose moving Barber up to late March, right? Putting them in that slot. And then I'm almost proposing that the Indianapolis road course at the beginning of the season goes away, which sounds really counterintuitive because they're there for the Indianapolis 500. And I know everybody talks about the other one going away, right? There's two road courses for Indianapolis. I'm almost proposing it goes away at the beginning of May there, and maybe you go to Charlotte and do the Roval. Maybe you go over there and do something, right?
Or Richmond, right? Because after the schedule was released yesterday, they talked about some of the tracks that were in consideration, and I think you were probably going to go here at some point, but some of the tracks that are in consideration, some mystery track out west, which I think we know what that is. That's the one that they're going to do the spring training at. You know the name of that one because I think you've been there, right? In Palm Springs.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a track that you could actually really have an event there because it's basically a country club for
Yeah. It,
sports cars.
yeah. It sounded like they want to do something. And I think that they're willing to make some changes and do some things there. I think it was Kevin Lee that was talking about that a little bit last week on their show, Kevin and Kirk Kevin. So that to me remains to be seen. Milwaukee, and I'll let you talk about Milwaukee if you want to, but Richmond, right to your point, you could probably do an IndyCar race in April in Richmond
Yeah, you
at the
could.
oval
The
there.
one year the IndyCar series tried to do it in Nazareth, Pennsylvania in April, and they got snowed on.
Yeah.
And so
And you
that
were
race
there.
was moved. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was actually there.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was one of those events where we left, and I'm not sure when that race was actually ran, but I never saw the
Yeah.
the event itself. So you got to be careful on how far north you do go when you're looking at that early in the season.
Right.
But I think the other thing, there's a few things that I think are missing. But I want to touch on if
I
you look at the
wanted
broadcast.
I wanted to
Go
talk
ahead.
about taking away one of the IndyCar or one of the IMS road course races. I'm not opposed to this. But like I mentioned to you yesterday when we were talking about this, was from a business standpoint, it makes too much sense for the series. They own the track, right? So as far as
Hmm.
infrastructure and promotion, it's kind of plug and play. It's probably the cheapest one. Either one of them, take your pick, the road course one or road course two, that they can put on because they already own everything. The infrastructure's there, the people are there. Yeah, they got to get some volunteers, but that's the normal case, right? And those folks don't generally cost them money, the
Hmm.
volunteers. So that's why, to me, those two races make sense from a business standpoint. If I were in IndyCar leadership, that's why those make sense. As a fan, and that's all we are. As a fan, I'd like to see one change, right? I'd like to see them use a little bit different or the other configuration. But I believe Will Power talked about that last year was these current Indy cars on that second configuration would be a horrible show. So the configuration as it stands now is the best possible show that IndyCar can put on,
Do you know why
unfortunately.
he stated that? Do you know the reasons behind that, Dan?
It was something to do with like this, I think the slower speed turns and some of um the complexity of some of the turns that they had that suited Formula One, but don't suit the current IndyCar.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at that second weekend there, where they're doing the road course, the second race there, they're basically there with NASCAR, right? So they've got
Yep.
everybody there
Yeah.
anyway. So to throw the Indy cars on track is, to your point, it's really no cost for
Yeah.
the organizer and the for Roger. Let's just say for Roger to put that on and actually have an event there. So
And I
and the
was
teams
at
are
that.
based there, right? There's no
Yeah.
travel.
Yep. And I was at that first road course race last year. and I was surprised at how well attended it was. I was very surprised at how well attended it was
Yeah, and I think the one after that is fairly well attended just because you have
because of
NASCAR,
NASCAR. Yep.
they're piggybacking on that. So yeah,
Mhm.
so I know all the fans don't love it. I think one of them should go, but to your point, from a business perspective, it makes sense. So that brings in, how do you add additional tracks? How do you bring in another potential road course or street course, whatever you want to call it? You know, Cleveland comes up a ton. I think the Cleveland folks want it, but you really talk about the East Coast presence. There isn't of IndyCar these days, and how do you put something out there?
Yeah,
And what
Watkins
does that look
Glen,
like?
Richmond,
Hmm.
right? Maybe can they compete at Road Atlanta? Is Road I mean, if IMSA can compete at Road Atlanta, I would imagine it wouldn't require that much in the way of
Hmm.
alterations to that track to put Indy cars on that track.
Yep. And you had Baltimore that was at one day had an event
And the
there, and
Baltimore people hated Baltimore.
they
Because
hated it there.
at the time that those races were going on, I've been an IndyCar fan a long time, but my job, right, my day job took me to Baltimore quite a bit at that time. It was part of my area of responsibility. And the people in Baltimore hated that race being there.
Mm,
It was such an
yeah,
inconvenience to them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so you look at the schedule here, and one other thing that was of note is, we've got, three ovals, four ovals on the circuit
Hmm.
in total, two races at Iowa again next year, which was well attended, a good event, super good activation, and even
I know, right?
with the new
Yep.
track in Detroit, I hope hopefully there's some more activation around, Chevy doing some things for that race. But it's good to see that they got race one as well as race two back, which is July 22nd and the 23rd. We have one 500 miler on the circuit this year, which of course is Indianapolis. I'm always looking for another 500 miler. I don't think we need to get back to three, but having two makes sense in my mind, to add another oval to this race circuit, and it being a 500 miler. And I don't know if you go Fontana. I don't know if you go Michigan. I know Michigan's tough with already having a race in Detroit. But other than that, those are kind of your two options, with the exception of Pocono. And Pocono to me was never I don't think it was ever well attended. And the tricky
Ill
triangle, as it's
suited
called.
for the current IndyCar as well. I mean, from a
Yeah,
we had two ugly incidents there
yeah.
in the
And I don't know
tournament
if
that we
we'll
did.
ever go back there
Right.
based on that.
I wanted to go to Pocono. It's funny you say that. They weren't well attended. I wanted to go to Pocono. Pocono was expensive. I remember talking to my father-in-law about going to the Pocono race because that's not far for us, right? As far as a drive, um, it's a very convenient drive. But I think cheap tickets were like $85 a ticket,
Okay.
which because you're not getting a lot of action there. You're not seeing a lot of other things. There's not a lot. It's not right. It's not an entertainment venue. It's a race and go home. It's $85.
Yeah. Which is inexpensive when you compare it to Formula One, but it's expensive when you compare it to going to the Indianapolis 500. You can go to the Indianapolis 500 for the same price.
Yeah, and you got more activation. Look how much fun we had walking around with the kids and walking. There was three of us, right? Bill and Jill from Shelby,
Yeah.
and you and your family and my wife and I, and we had a great time. But Pocono was just putting on a race,
Yes. My wallet did not
and
like the race though.
I wouldn't have spent the $85. I would have spent more. I would have spent probably 115 on a ticket, and I would have gotten anywhere near
Yeah.
that level of entertainment
Yeah.
at
Yeah,
that.
and it's the greatest spectacle in racing, right? So it's the place you want to be for during the month of May. It is what it is. So if you can go to Indianapolis for 85 or go to Pocono, you're going to go to Indianapolis all day
Yeah,
long. So that's got to be considered. So I don't know if it's a race out in California or what it is from a 500 miler, but those endurance races, I'll call it endurance, right? They're pretty much an endurance. Those were big back in the day. There was three on the circuit, and I think the tracks, the series could use another 500 miler, and I think you differ a little bit on that opinion.
I don't. I don't think they do. Only because I think the oval proposition outside of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is a tough business proposition for anybody.
Hmm.
I think, you and I know this because we go there, and probably most of our listeners know this because they're, you know, big IndyCar fans is you can see the whole track. You can see the race generally, right? Because it's on ovals. And
Hmm.
it's fun to be there on that, but it doesn't catch the casual fan either.
Yeah.
It really
So
doesn't.
you look at it as it almost needs to be an event. It needs to
Yeah.
be almost like a
Like
Nashville.
High V, right?
Yeah.
Like what High V did with
Hmm.
Iowa. If you had and it's only because I can't think of a better word, but if you have like a carnival atmosphere, right, at one of these
Hmm.
events, I think you would put more people there because it's now an event as
Yeah.
opposed to just the show, right? You if you have a concert either before or after, if you have the 500-mile race, but you've got other things going on there, I think that would make a difference to that. But also, where do you put it, right? We talked about Michigan. Michigan's going to dice up some of the Detroit support, and I don't think Roger Penske would want to do that.
Hmm.
California Speedway, it depends on the time of year because we've been there where it's just prohibitively hot. Where because that
Yeah.
that speedway sits in an area of California that doesn't, it's not 75 degrees 9 months a year.
Yeah. And I
So
don't think you put a 500 miler in front of Indianapolis. It has to come after at some point.
right, right. So and to me, and I think you mentioned this, I don't need another California race. We're not I realize, some of our open wheelers and some of our great open wheel drivers from the past have come from the West Coast.
Hmm.
We're a Midwest series,
Yeah.
right? So where do you put it?
It's a great point. Where do you put it? And is there
You know,
infrastructure already around to have one on a
you
different
got
track?
Kansas, you got Kentucky,
Yeah, you do. You got both of those.
and I don't think that either one of those would, because of the draw of Indianapolis, I don't think either one of those would make any impact on people deciding, well, I think I'm going to go to Kansas instead of Indy.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at how the season ends, I want to talk a little bit about that ending at Laguna Seca. I'd really like, and this goes back to your point, Dan. I'd really like to see it to be an event, and I don't see Laguna Seca as an event. It's basically out in the desert. I'll call it that. Everywhere in California seems like the desert these days, but it's out in the desert. Not a whole lot of activity going on from what I can see. The crowds seem very sparse there, but how do you make it a marquee event for the final race of the season? And the reason I say this is because when you look at IndyCar, that championship seems to always go down to the final race of the season. And there's a lot of people that potentially could win the race and win the championship. So from that perspective, I think it needs to be a bigger deal than what it is today. And I don't
Mhm.
think Laguna offers that. I don't know what the solution is. Um, what comes to mind to me is Long Beach, but Long Beach has had its spot on the schedule for so long where it is, and it's so successful. You don't really want to mess with it, right? You feel
Yeah,
like
I
you
agree.
could you
Yep.
could taint that event if you do something different. So, but if you could have a Long Beach type event at the end of the season, I think that's what IndyCar needs to strive towards.
Yeah. You're right. Where I don't know. Like I told you, I'm targeting going to Laguna next year. My wife and I and some other friends, and hopefully you'll get a chance to come out as well. But I want to see it because you're right, and it might just be camera angles, and it might just be where um, stands are located around that track that you
Hmm.
just don't see anything. So I don't. I
Yeah,
mean, I think the racing is good. I don't think it's great, but I think the racing is good.
yeah,
Um, why IndyCar chooses to host their finale there, I don't know. I don't,
yeah.
you know.
Could you do it in Cleveland at the
I
airport?
think I think the whole boat of Cleveland coming back on the schedule is long gone.
Think it's long gone.
Long
No
gone.
chance of
Yeah.
that.
No.
But do you think that could turn into that could be an event that people want to go to if it's a Midwest series? You got the finale, over in Cleveland. That's something that could be positive, right, for the series as a whole. And at least that's where I'm coming from. I
I
don't.
liked your idea of the Roval. I don't know how these cars would do on the Roval, but I'd rather see it like in that type of area, right? Like a Midwest, Mid-Atlantic kind of market
Yeah. So when you,
and East
so
Coast.
yeah.
I didn't
So
mind
overall,
right? Wasn't the finale at some point like at Watkins Glen?
I don't recall, honestly. I couldn't tell you if it was there. I'd have to go back and look at some of the
Yeah,
past seasons, but I'm not.
because I wouldn't mind that either.
Yeah, that's
Destinations is
good.
what you got to think of. And maybe I'm just I mean, I go to Cleveland, right, for work, but it isn't a destination spot for me.
Yeah, I think for many years when you look at Homestead, Homestead was the finale.
That
Um,
I'd take that as a destination spot, right? South
yeah,
Florida.
but it doesn't scream Miami, right? Like I don't think of Miami when I think of Homestead, and
No, right.
maybe that's just me. Maybe it is right around the corner from there, but um, yeah, and I heard on Twitter that people would like it to end at an oval as well. I think you made one remark before we got on is that Worldwide Technology Raceway, that race is now on Sunday, which in the past it was on Saturday.
Right. I don't know what the scheduling conflict is there or if that was an accommodation to get it on NBC. You have it in front of you. I just went on screen save again, but is it on NBC?
It is on NBC, and
It might
you
be to
look at this.
accommodate network.
Yeah, and you got 13 races on NBC, which is
Yeah,
good out of the
it's
17
great.
race schedule. So that's they're doing the right thing on that front to gain additional fans as well as have it on network TV so others can watch. You have three races: Road America, Mid Ohio, and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Road Course second turn there on USA Network. So you
Hmm.
got three races over there, and then Toronto for some reason is still on Peacock only, which is interesting to me
Yeah.
that they've continued that. But I don't know what the television sort of looks like in Canada for for them to watch the entire uh, um, uh, series, if you will. So the entire schedule there. So that's kind of how it breaks down from a network perspective, which is good. So I'm glad they right there was talks about extending the contract with NBC, which they did. And there's a lot of races on the network, which is a good job by the teams
Yeah.
and Team Penske. So overall, I think we need to add a few races. I think the schedule that
You don't
came
want to
out
talk about
was
Milwaukee because I have a great line for you.
I don't so I really enjoyed Milwaukee as the race after Indianapolis, right? Back in the day. I'm not advocating for Milwaukee. I've been there to Milwaukee for a race. It is a great venue. It's at the fairgrounds. It fell apart for some reason, right?
Hmm.
There's been a ton of discussion about bringing Milwaukee back. People want it. Dan, where are you? Where do you
I'm
stand
not
on
as
Milwaukee?
romantic about Milwaukee at all as other people are.
But a flat oval provides great passing. I enjoy that
I was gonna
event.
say I want Milwaukee back on the schedule about as bad as I want Ryan Hunter-Reay on the grid.
Okay, so we know where you stand on that. That's not at all,
Yeah, not at
not
all.
at all.
Yeah, Ryan's a great
Yeah,
guy. I want to see Ryan as a advisor at Andretti Autosport next year for the four guys that they have in
I,
cars.
I think
I
they
want to
need
see him
somebody
as the grown
based on
up.
our last show.
Yeah,
Yeah, we talked about that. They need
yeah.
somebody. They need a Dario
I'd like to see him in
Franchitti.
that role because I think he'd be great at it. Right? I'd like to see him in that role as the grown up.
Yes, keeping the young drivers in line and Roman Grosjean, who's not as young as the rest, but still
Right.
out there doing his thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Not a good. I mean, we expect good things out of him next year, but I don't see him as like a team lead, like as
mhm.
somebody who's going to be, is going to rally the troops and pull everybody together. I don't see that.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't
I don't see it
either.
out of any of those guys. By the way,
Nope. I
not that
agree
runs the show.
100%. So,
So the schedule is
my
out, Tim. Where are
takeaways,
we going?
my, I'm sorry.
The schedule's out. Where are we going?
Where are we going? I've heard that we may be going to St. Petersburg.
I love how you
I
said May.
checked
We are.
flights. I checked flights yesterday, by the way. They're up there a little bit. I think it's pushing into a spring break, but so we talked about that. We will probably be at the Indianapolis 500. I say probably. Yeah, I'm very
We will be.
non-committal. You know
I know.
this.
Jesus. Yeah,
Detroit. We should be at
for
Detroit.
sure.
That's pretty much down the road from
We'll be at
us.
24 hours at Daytona.
Yes, which is not on the schedule,
Yep.
at least the IndyCar schedule.
Right.
And then I don't know what else. You're talking about Laguna
Hmm.
for you and your bride, right, to be out there. Did I
I'd
get
like
a
to go to Iowa. I
You'd like
still
to
want
go
to
to
go to
Iowa?
Iowa.
Iowa, interesting. 2 races in 1, so you
Yep.
get 2 for 1,
I'd
right?
like to go to St. Louis as well. So I would take your pick, whichever one you think is you'd like to go to.
Yeah, there's, that's a lot of races to go to. I'd have to see how things
3 or
sort of shake
4.
out here.
Let's see if we can do 3 or 4. I
Yeah,
know, I
what
know.
about Toronto? Streets of Toronto.
It's not
Eh,
far. It's a
are
4-hour drive.
aren't they repaving that for this year, I hope? Because that
Don't
circuit
know.
looked
Should be.
in bad,
Bad
bad
shape.
order last year.
Yeah. Toronto's
Eh,
4-hour drive.
Toronto's 4-hour drive. Nashville's not that far.
8-hour
Yeah,
drive.
there's a lot of circuits we can get to with very little drive time.
Mhm.
Honestly.
You
So
can take the camper to
yeah.
Toronto.
So in looking at the schedule, I'm really hoping they've been focused on 2024, adding new circuits and things of that sort. This year was maybe a year that is status quo, which
Yep.
you can tell from what they put out. But 2024 looks to add a track, is what I've been reading. We're not sure what that is.
I think the
Um,
one that's most likely to get added sooner rather than later um, is Richmond. Richmond was on the schedule prior to COVID, and I think Richmond will come onto the schedule before Milwaukee will.
yeah, I could take or leave Richmond though.
Yeah, I'd like to
I've
see
been
it.
to the Richmond race.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. I'd like to see it with the current car. I don't. I like the market, um, and I'd like to see that. I'd like to see Watkins Glen back too, but nobody ever talks about that.
No, that seems to
Um,
be off the docket.
Homestead, the idea of a Homestead Speedway, that doesn't bother me either. I think I'd rather go to Homestead before Fontana. I'd rather go to Homestead than Texas.
Yeah.
Unless Toyota comes back to the series, Texas makes a lot of sense if Toyota comes back to the series because Texas is based right there,
Hmm.
or Toyota's
Yeah,
based right
Toyota
there,
is. Yep, they're
right?
right over there. Yep.
So if not, Miami makes a lot of sense to me. I don't want to
But
see any. I don't want to see them going back to Coda.
you don't?
No,
You could
I
put
didn't
that
think the
in right in
racing was that good.
between St. Pete and Texas Motor Speedway. You could
Yeah.
slot that right in.
Mhm.
You're already there.
Yep.
I don't mind seeing them go back to Coda as long
Yeah.
as they have
I didn't think the racing was that good. I really didn't.
no.
Mm-mm.
As long as they put in track limits, because I
Because
can't
I've
stand
seen
them.
Formula One cars there. So once you've seen Formula One cars on a track like that, and then you look at Indy cars, it's startling. Like
It's
when I
what?
went to see NASCAR for the first time at Michigan Speedway, I was like, this is a drag.
Yeah.
Like they're lumbering around here. You know what I mean? And it's
180
like,
miles an hour
right,
versus
right.
230.
220. Yeah. 220,
Yeah.
230. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's where you see the difference when you go there. So to me, that's what that is. I'm just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we'll be there
Yeah.
in a few weeks, right? We're going to
That's
be
it. Hey,
in
thanks
Coda.
for calling this thing together, Timmy. Get us a
Yeah,
chance to
for
talk about the
sure.
schedule, our wish list, put that out there, a list of grievances, which you're not as aggrieved as you were yesterday. So
No, I'm a little more,
yeah, a little more
you give me
reserved.
24 hours to settle down and I sort of simmer a little bit here. But yeah, overall,
And I'm the same level of meh that I was yesterday.
yeah, you are. You were kind of like, that's kind of what I expected. It is what it is.
Mhm.
Looking forward to the season.
Yeah,
And there you have it. That's the review
there you go.
of
That's all I
the
got, Tim.
2023 schedule.
There it is.
Dan, you got anything else?
That's it. That's all I got.
All right. Well, thanks for
everybody.
joining us.
Catch you in a
Dan,
couple
you can
weeks.
close us out.
See you guys.